Hello everyone, welcome to MS 2900 Exploring Media Theory. This is the pre-recorded version of lecture number 4, Marxism, Ideology and the Media. And I've also chosen to give this lecture a little subtitle, which is We Are Stupid to Believe What We Believe. Okay, so in this lecture we're going to look at ideology from a Marxist perspective. And as we talked about last week, media analysis gets two main approaches from Marxism. On the one hand, there's a political economic approach which derives from a lot of Marx's early work. And here they look at how the economic system directly causes the cultural system. And if you go back to last week's lecture, we explored how that all works, and we looked at a contemporary version of that through the work of Christian FLUX, where he looked at value chains. And this week we're moving on to another part of Marxism which more relates to his later work, and this has been taken up by a lot of theorists, and this concerns the idea of ideology. Now, ideology is of course a key term in the field of cultural studies, media analysis and particularly literary studies, and it's been widely explored and there's a lot of work out there on this stuff. So in this lecture we're going to kind of give you a brief snapshot of a couple of the main ideas. Yeah, there is tons more reading to do, and please feel free to read beyond the set texts. So the idea of ideology. Well, ideology refers to the way in which one group of people get another group of people to behave in a particular way. And being Marxists, they're very concerned with how power is articulated and maintained. So they're particularly concerned with why people hold beliefs that seem antithetical or opposite to their material position. Why do we believe we should continue with the current system when it's obvious that we're not benefiting from the present state of affairs? So ideology allows us to kind of start questioning how culture is structured in such a way that enables the group holding the power to have the maximum control with the minimum amount of conflict. Now it's important to remember that ideology is not direct oppression. It's not people forcing us to do something. There's no one standing on our shoulders telling us we must do something or holding a gun to our head. So this is not about groups deliberately planning to oppress people or alter their consciousness. Instead, it's about how dominant groups in society work through the values of society, through our understanding and conceptions of the world, and through our symbolic systems, through our understanding of what things mean. And all these things together tend to legitimize the current order. So ideology is about how the current way of doing and operating things seems legitimate to us. Why is that so? Let's go back to some of our basic Marxist assumptions from last week. Marxists are interested in how dominant social groups are able to reproduce their social and economic power. That comes from Taylor and Willis in 1999. What we saw last week is a Marxist quote: "The ideas of the ruling class in every epoch be ruling ideas." That was from the German Ideology by Marx and Engels. So it's about the ruling structure determines the culture of a society. If we have a system in which the few own lots, then we will get a culture in which the disarrangement is legitimated. And that's what we talked about last week. That's the political economic interpretation of things. We also talked about the idea of base and superstructure, if you remember. So you have the capitalist economic system down here. That's called the economic base. And if you remember, there's different economic systems, and each economic system will result in a different kind of society. So the capitalist economic system will result in a capitalist society. We will have the culture and values of capitalist society. And this is completely dependent upon this. The system causes the culture. So all culture, in this crude interpretation of Marx, all culture derives directly from the economic system that underpins it. So the economic structure determines the culture of a society. And if you have a system in which the few own lots, then we will get a culture in which disarrangement is legitimated. Of course, I've shown you this picture before. So this is the Bullingdon Club. These are a group of young men at Oxford University, and they're very wealthy young men. And one of the practices at a club was to run in and smash up restaurants knowing that they could well pay for it. And one of the entry routines to joining the Bullingdon Club was to burn a £50 note in front of a homeless person, just to show how much disregard you have for money. And if you look carefully, you can see our former Prime Minister, David Cameron, up here, and down here is possibly next Prime Minister, he's currently Foreign Secretary, is Boris Johnson. So the idea is, how did these people, these very wealthy people, get to such power, get to such systems? Well, ideology would try and legitimate that. It would try and legitimate that these are natural rulers, these are the people who should be in charge. So, what does ideology do in this particular model? Well, according to Marx, ideology has three main functions. It naturalises, it historicises, and it eternalises the current economic system. So let's go back a bit. So the system appears to be natural. Our current economic system is just how things are. In fact, some people have tried to argue that our economic system is almost like it's some kind of Darwinian process. We've arrived at this system where the successful do best, and they've got this meritocracy in place, and the successful do very well, and the poor, well, they just fall away, as in nature. So things are naturally like this. Now, it also historicises it. So the system appears to be the logical conclusion to historical development. We kind of think we've reached the epitome of systems now. No one ever, sort of like in normal economic systems, thinks about what's going to come next. Theresa May gave a speech just the other week, where she talked about how capitalism is the highest form of governance. It's the best system. It lifts the most people out of poverty. And we've evolved to this wonderful position. And finally, there's an assumption that now we've got this natural state of affairs, things will stay that way. Barring regression or things getting worse, this is the best we could do. We should try and preserve this system. And it will always be this way as long as we don't mess up. So ideology naturalises, historicises and eternalises. It makes it look natural and normal. It makes it look like this is the best system that history's allowed us to get. And it makes it look like, well, we shouldn't change things. We should keep going with this system. Now, under our older model, of the one we talked about last week, Marx's older model, ideology is false. And what that means is we've got this set of beliefs that's opposite to our actual material conditions. We live in the world, we don't have a lot of money, but we still have a set of values of someone far wealthier than ourselves. So ideology kind of works like a screen, a false projection upon us that stops us from seeing the reality of our economic conditions. And if we ever saw the reality, we wake up. We go, oh no, I've been wrong all my life. And I realise now what I should do is go out there and have a revolution and get my fair share of the wealth. And under this model, it's up to the Marxists to reveal the truth. And back in sort of like the early 20th century, a group of people called Bolsheviks, and their job was to go into societies to stir up trouble, to allow people to see the reality of what they do. They've got to stir it up. So contemporary versions of this are the socialist worker. So if you ever go on a demonstration or a march or anything like that, you'll see people waving banners that say socialist worker. Now the socialist workers, they believe they're doing good, and what they believe is that they're not there to support the actual cause of the dispute. And if you go on a strike or something, people will come from the socialist worker to support you, and you think that's great. But what they're there is to stir up more trouble, to awaken us to our true ideological state. And if we can see the world as they do, we will wake up. So a socialist worker or a Bolshevik is there to allow us to see through the veneer of our nice life, and to see that underneath our nice life is actually a lot of exploitation going on. And once we realise that we're being exploited, we'll wake up and have a revolution. Now this model of seeing through things actually goes right back to Plato. And this is this picture on the screen at the moment, where you've got a fire up the back and you've got the prisoners and you've got shadow models. It's derived from Plato's model of the cave. And what Plato, I don't want to go too deep into Plato, but what he was arguing is the duty of people to reveal the truth. So let me talk you through this. So you've got, in this model comes from about 2,200 years ago. So you've got a fire over here, And you've got these gentlemen here, and they're holding up various odds and shapes and things. And there's us down here. We're the prisoners in this model, and we're shackled. You can see the ball and chain, and we're shackled to chairs. And we look forward, and all we can see on the wall here is these shadows. For us, that's reality. That's what we see. Okay, and that's what Plato said. And what Plato is arguing is that if we can somehow turn around and see what we do, we can see the reality of things. And eventually we must run outside the cave. Marx takes it slightly differently, and he says what we've got to do is see the illusion of ideology. We shouldn't see things as they are, as ideology presents it to us. We should somehow break through it. So through the study of philosophy, through the study of economics, through the study of media and media analysis, through history and sociology, we can come close to perceiving the ideological systems and how we're placed in specific sets of relations by those systems. And we can begin to see the machines that produce the mediation of reality. We can't see reality itself, but we can begin to see the machines. And of course, those machines are the media. And that's why we study the media, because through studying them, we can study how ideology operates. Through studying how ideology operates, we can begin to see the various forms of oppression that we've been subject to. So, there's slight criticisms of this position, and I want to talk about two main critics of this, who are both Marxists, and advance the Marxist position a lot further. So I want to look at very briefly at the work of this gentleman here. His name is Louis Althusser, he's a Frenchman, and another person called Antonio Gramsci, who is an Italian. So more recent theories have tended to look at how elements of society contribute to the maintenance of the system. So we're not just talking about us being subject, or the media being subject to the economic forces. Here, cultural life is not just a result of economic life, as the earlier Marxist system would advocate. Instead, they help to maintain it, to contribute to it, and even to accelerate it. And we're going to look at the work of these two gentlemen in regards to this. So Louis Althusser was born 1918, died 1990. He was quite a controversial figure, and he had a very torrid personal life, which resulted in him killing his wife. He was married 4 times in the end, and he ended up having some various mental illnesses and murdered his wife in the end. However, his work was very, very influential. So he developed criticisms of Marxism, that ideology, such culture, is a result of the economic systems. And what he did, he said that's been true for a long time. However, modernity is different. So if you remember, Marx had that model where you have the base and the superstructure, and all throughout history, when you have a different economic model, you get a different culture. But he said what happens when you get into the period of modernity, from around 1750 onwards, things begin to change. Modernity is different from other periods of time. And that's because of the changes that took place in modernity. The superstructure acquired a degree of independence from the base. The superstructure develops above and beyond the determinants of what the base does. So as before, the superstructure is purely dependent on the base. The economic system calls the culture. In modernity, it goes off on its own. And as a consequence of this, we need to look beyond the merely economic relations and extend our analysis to other aspects of society. We need to start looking at culture and ideology and things like that, rather than purely at the economic system. So we should just look at the economics. That says we should just, but it should say we shouldn't just look at the economics to explain inequality. We need to look at culture and the media as well, and how they contribute to inequality. So Lewis's ideas are not more complex than Marx, but they took certain Marxist ideas and developed them. And he argued, whereas Marx had argued that ideology is a kind of false consciousness, a false set of values that we own, that is not correct to our economic position, so the beliefs that we have don't show us the reality of our opinion. That's the idea of false consciousness. And the Althusser argued slightly differently. He said, rather, ideology structures what we do and it makes our reality. Now we need to think back a little bit to that first lecture I gave you, where we talked about structuralism. Althusser is very much a structuralist. And he says, we cannot exist outside of our culture or ideology. We can't think beyond our ideas. It sounds a bit strange, but all our ideas, we don't make the world, all our ideas make us. And we can't think beyond our ideas. We can never get to the real conditions of life, because we can never get beyond language. Because language provides meaning to our lives, the systems that we live through. So in short, we have no reality beyond our ideology. And indeed, we adopt an identity or a thought patterns or a way of thinking from a shared set. And he uses two terms to try and explore this idea, and these are complex terms, so don't worry too much if they seem a little bit tricky at the moment. So he wrote his famous essay in 1971 called Ideology and the Ideological State Apparatus. And he introduced a number of terms in this. One of them was his interpolation. And it's the process of an individual adopting a set of beliefs or ideology from a system of beliefs. So we think our ideas are our own. You know, we have ideas and we think them ourselves and we come up with this. What Althusser says was, well no, actually, all the ideas and beliefs that you have are brought into you. And you adopt them. You have a consciousness that derives its meaning from this set of ideas. And you bring them inside you and you make them your own. So ideas aren't driven by ourselves. We've taken on board social ideas, ideas from the social world, and brought them inside our head. And our minds are structured by the wider social world. We're bringing ideas from the wider social world, but they appear to be our own. And in this kind of work, he drew upon very heavily upon the idea of the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. And he looked at various aspects of the development of a person and looked at how ideas are brought in at different stages of our own personal development. Now, our beliefs come to us, however, through what Althusser termed the ideological state apparatus. So he looked at things like family, education, media, religion, culture and the arts. All of these devices via which ideology is passed on to us. So our consciousness, what we are, emerges from these. You know, we draw from our family beliefs, we draw from our experiences of education, we draw down from the media, religion influences what we are, culture and the arts, these are all influences. And we exist ourselves in a system of beliefs, and we internalise those beliefs, and they become our own. We believe that this is what I believe, but we've taken those beliefs from somewhere else. So if you think about your own beliefs, you can think about where you got them from. And in turn, we play a part in reproducing those beliefs. So if when you produce bits of culture, you reproduce the values of your ideas. Those, of course, were given to you by somebody else. So the people produced by this, what Althusser termed the ideological subjects, that's me, you, and everybody, facilitate the economic systems. So we play a part in furthering the economic system. But we ourselves are purely subject to these ideological systems. We don't come up with ideas ourselves. We don't have true freedom, because all we can do is work with the ideas we have. And those ideas come from family, education and media, which are systems themselves that are there to reproduce and legitimate the economic system. So it's quite a tricky idea. Now, occasionally the ideological system breaks down. For some reason the ideological state apparatus, the ISA, fail to do their job, and it creates subjects that are not convivial to the economic system. There's a range of systems to back them up. So for some reason you decide, I'm not going to play the game, I'm not going to join in with capitalism, I'm going to become a criminal, or I'm going to become a political activist, or something like that. There's systems to back it up. So if you don't behave, if you don't adopt the correct set of beliefs, then there's the police, there's the judiciary, and there's the armed forces, or occasionally there's medicine, particularly psychiatric medicine. So they might step in, and if you behave differently, maybe the police take you over, or maybe the judiciary takes you on, and if they feel the army's there, or they might just label you mad and say your beliefs are so problematic, we've got to lock you up in a psychiatric hospital. So people who are faulty, people who haven't come out the education system in the right way, what we call a non-compliant subject, are labelled We call them criminals, we call them terrorists, we call them lunatics, and they're dealt with. Now I put these pictures up on here. Now you may remember this, you may not, but back in 2011 there was a number of riots all over the UK. There's lots of civil disobedience. There's riots in London, Bristol, Manchester. Most major cities had riots. And these riots largely consisted of young people protesting initially about a killing of a young black person in London. And quite soon they spiraled out of control. There was lots of violence going on. People smashed up shops and then, acted as thieves, and they were looting shops, and there's lots of violence going on. Very quickly we shifted from ideological systems to having the police involved. And there's a quote here from a man called Roger Helmer, who's a UKIP MEP, he's a member of the European Parliament, and he sent a memo to COBRA. And COBRA is the government committee that deals with emergencies. It actually stands for Cabinet Office Briefing Room. It's got a much sexier title than the actual acronym stands for. And Roger Helmer sent this tweet out. It says, "Time to get tough. Bring in the army. Shoot looters and arsonists on sight." So within 3 days we've gone from peaceful, normal people protesting on the street through to riots. Very quickly, we can't control them. Let's get the guns out. Let's get the army on the street. So the police did come out in massive forces. They did use riot gear. They developed this technique called kettling, where they would control people for periods of hours and stop them getting out. So very quickly, the ideological state apparatus evolved and deployed the repressive state apparatus. So both systems working sort of like in tangent to keep people in control. Now, what about criticisms of Althusser? Well, are people simply duped into adopting such a sense of beliefs? And is it really that different from the more traditional Marxist interpretation? And aren't we really a bit more free-willed in this? I mean, yeah, we can get beliefs from our parents, but we resist the beliefs of our parents and people, in education. We challenge them. And how do new ideas occur? Well, Marx's ideas don't seem to really cater for that very well. So Althusser's ideas don't seem to cater for that very well. So although there is incredibly effective tools for understanding ideology, there's a lot of criticism voiced about it. Some people developed his ideas further. Now, there's a person called Antonio Gramsci, who actually wrote slightly before Althusser. He was an Italian communist. He was locked up by Mussolini in the 1920s, and he wrote these incredible prison notebooks, these real detailed accounts, Marxist accounts, and they were smuggled out of prison gradually by friends and family who came to see him. And he wrote about the struggle against bourgeois values. He was a Marxist activist, a communist, so he wrote about how bourgeois values, the values of the middle class, weren't appropriate for revolutionaries. And his ideas were written in Italian and didn't get translated until about the 1970s. What we found is many of his ideas agree with most of what Marxist analysis, but not an ideology. And his idea of how power works is called hegemony, or hegemony. And I've never known how you say that word. I'm going to say hegemony because I like it. But his idea of power works is hegemony. So he says values are disseminated throughout society. They're not imposed from above. So as Althusser was talking about the various mechanisms via which values are imposed upon us, so those ideological state apparatus of the family, of education and religion and so on, hegemony operates slightly different. It says values are disseminated throughout it. And because they're so widespread, we come to see our values as common sense. They're the normal beliefs that we have, that you'd be daft not to have them. The values that maintain the power relations permeate all levels and all aspects of culture. They're right the way through, right from our understanding of nobility, right the way down to all aspects of our life. And they're in the very fabric of how we experience life. So a hegemonic belief is something we all concur with. It's normal and it's spread throughout society. And because we all concur with these beliefs and we share them, we all actively contribute to their maintenance. We all police them and make sure that other people don't violate them. So rather than a passive public, a passive people, which are subject to power coming down from above, Hegemony says, no, the public is powerful. And what we do, we contribute to our own subjugation. So the ruling group, and we agree with this. So you end up with things like the idea of the ruling groups. So ruling groups present themselves to us as the best able to provide us with the means to pursue our needs. And we agree with that. We vote for politicians that we think are most suitable. So we've got 2 or 3 people who could be the Prime Minister in our country. And we choose because, of course, there's millions of other people in our country who could be that. But somehow, hegemony allows us to think of a way in which there's only a few number of people are doing it. And so to maintain power, the dominant groups, they constantly realign themselves. They take on new values. And they borrow from each other to make themselves look the most attractive. So they're adopting constant critical concerns. So every time you find a belief system coming up that's slightly more challenging, you find the political parties adopt it. So you saw this a few years ago with green issues. And the Green Party comes along and it raises all these issues. And quick as anything, the Labour and the Conservative Party adopt green issues because they're the best able to do this. They're the best able to articulate this particular position. Now, ideology is not fixed, but it's constantly in flux. And there's a quote here from Stuart Hall. Hegemony is not universal and given to the continuing rule of a particular class. It has to be won, reproduced and sustained. Hegemony is, as Gramsci said, a moving equilibrium containing relations of forces favourable and unfavourable to this and that tendency. So you constantly have to reposition yourself as a person in charge. So hegemony is about getting us to actively agree to the system of oppression. Ideology is not imposed, but it's a system of choices and ideas that we make. And these are grouped together into sets which we choose to adhere to. And moreover, we actively police ourselves. When opposing views are aired, they are attacked and ridiculed. And you see this all the time. If someone puts out quite a radical position, lots of people come in and say, no, you shouldn't do this, you should do this. So we constantly re-articulate this thing. And if you think about a group of people, if one person behaves strangely or against the social norms, the other people in the group, will actively act to try and stop that person behaving in that way. They'll voice their disapproval of it. They might police them in certain ways. Now that goes on society-wide. When people offer a challenge to the dominant system, we police ourselves. And ideology is getting us to do that, to consent to our own oppression, and actually to partake in our own oppression. So the role of this, the role of the media in this is quite tricky. The media play a part in justifying oppression by making it seem legitimate. And there's a very important work by a gentleman named Noam Chomsky who took this idea and applied it to Western society. And he developed a very complex model of the media. But that is for another day. But his text is called The Manufacture of Consent. And it looks at how we play a part in manufacturing consent and how the media have a role in keeping consent going, keeping us working. So to conclude, ideological Marxism is different from political economic Marxism. And ideological Marxism stresses the importance of culture and values. And we talked about the 2 main theorists. We talked about Althusser, who sees us as subjects, who sees us as being produced by the system. And then he talked about the ideological state apparatus, which is about producing the subjects, and the repressive state apparatus, such as the police and the army, which come in and step in and polices should things go wrong. Gramsci offers a slightly different account, and he sees us as willing, if not complicit, participants in our own subjectification. Now in this lecture I'm afraid we really only just scratched the surface of ideological analysis. And there's an enormous amount of work out there. And I urge you to go and look up this topic on YouTube and in other forums and have a look at the reading. It'll be quite interesting. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you've enjoyed it.